Wow. Isn't How many of you go through life like that? It's rhetorical, but that's you. We know who you are. And that's why you don't go to the MVD or the DMV ever. But we go through life in such a hurry. You know, we've been talking about staying hungry. We've been talking about hustling. But how do you do those things without burning out? In the Bible, we see this pattern of working hard, and then we see margins. But as you watch this clip, and you realize that's a lot of us. That's you in that clip, hurrying and rushing and trying to get other people to hurry through their work. We do that. There's a famous, world famous cardiologist out of San Francisco. His name is Dr. Meyer Friedman. And Dr. Friedman says that, in the 60s, he coined the term A-type personality, and he tied it to heart attacks. But then he says, more recently, he coined the phrase hurry sickness. And he says hurry sickness is causing heart attacks in America. And he says hurry sickness is epidemic in our country. And today I want to talk about the antidote. Today I want to talk about the answer to it. I want to talk about margins. But maybe you have hurry sickness and you don't even know it. Here's a few of the symptoms. Maybe you're at the grocery store, and if you ever go to the grocery store and you're in the checkout line, you treat it as though it's a race between the person across from you in the next aisle. All right? Side note, the self-checkout may be empty, but that doesn't count because they just don't work. It's a failure in technology and sociology. It just don't work. You know you have maybe hurry sickness if when you're driving, you've got a latte in one hand and you're texting with the other and you're driving with your knee. Some of you are really good knee drivers. You know you have hurry sickness if when you pull up to a stoplight in your car, when you're pulling up, you choose a lane based on the make and model of the car. You know, how fast is it going to be? And the age of the driver. All right, some of you know who you are. You know you have hurry sickness if every night to get your kids in bed, you create a mock race. And you make them race to put their pajamas on, to brush their teeth, and they make a race to get in bed. And they fall for it every time. It'll be 8 in the afternoon, in the evening, they'll fall for it again and again. But we go through life hurrying and rushing, and it wears on our soul. Not only does it wear us out physically, but it drains the soul. And so today I want to talk about margins. Margin is a business term. In business, you talk about profit margins. And sometimes we think margins in business are just about making money. But think about this. Margins allow freedom in the workplace. A business that is thriving and has huge profit margins has freedom to expand, to do new things, to be creative, to bring on new staff. And in the same way in our lives, if we have margins, we have the room to do that. A business that has no profit margins is what? It's a failing business. It's going under. And in the same way, if we live with no margins in our lives and we feel like we're being squeezed and we feel like our soul is being dried out. I don't know if you have felt like you had to have a margin in your life, but I was in San Diego, this was a summer ago, and we were staying in Pacific Beach near the ocean, and so it was early in the morning, my family was still asleep, and I walked down to Pacific Bean, and it's right by the pier. And I'm there having a cup of coffee, and I've got headphones in, and I'm writing on my laptop. And then a guy comes in, and he gets a coffee, and he's kind of rushing around, and he's almost out of breath, and he sits down next to me, and in spite of the fact I have headphones on, he wants to talk. So he's asking me about me, and so I say, hey, well, where are you from? He says, oh, I'm from Phoenix. I said, well, when'd you get here? He said, about 5 minutes ago. I said, really? Did you fly in? Because it's only 7:30. He said, no, I drove. I said, you drove? He said, yeah, I worked the swing shift. I got off work at 2 a.m. and I thought, I've got to make it to the beach. And so he said he got in his car and drove the rest of the night and came straight to Pacific Bean. And he's having a coffee at 7:30 in the morning. And I said, well, how long can you stay? He goes, well, I have work at 6 tonight, so I got to leave here about 12:30. I've got about 4.5 hours here. He said, but I had to get away and see the ocean and get on the beach. His soul was crying out for margins. And maybe you're feeling like that this morning. You're feeling like you're worn thin and you need some space in your life to breathe. In the Bible, in the gospel accounts, we keep reading of the margins that Jesus created for his own life, and then we read of the margins that others around him learned to keep. So turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 10. We have this great interaction between Jesus and two women. And one has margins, and one is a really hard, busy, hardworking person and does not have margins in her life. Luke 10:38, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, 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 the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. Do you see how Mary has created margins, and Jesus says it's good? I have this key idea in your handout. Take this thought home with you. Hopefully it's something you can start to live by. Life without margins will always be physically exhausting and spiritually hollow. The need today is for margins, space in your life where you can rest, grow, become creative, and thrive as a follower of Jesus Christ. Years ago, in the last century, which, well, that was only, 16 years ago, but years and years ago. But let's say 50 years ago, futurists would talk widely and with great expertise on how technology would shorten the work week in America. That's what they said. They said because of the advances, I'm going back 40, 50 years, because of the advances in technology and computers, our work, will be able to get it done, some said, in 3 days a week. That one day we would have 5-hour work days. So that was 50 years ago. Do you know what's happened since then? The work week has gotten longer. Somehow technology, which was supposed to be time gifting and time freeing, has robbed us of even more time. I have this list of work hours a year that the average American puts in. In the 70s, it was 1,600. 79, it was 1,700. By the 90s, it was over 1,800 hours, and now we're probably over 1,900 hours a week. It's been the exact opposite. The problem is that we think we can live without margins. If you're hungry, we give you something to eat, right? If you can't breathe, we give you oxygen. If you're sick, we give you medicine. If you have no margins, we give you one more thing to do. Isn't that how life goes? Whether it's your family or your work, there's always one more thing to do. Let me contrast and compare. Let me help you understand what I mean by margins today by comparing and contrasting marginless living and living with margins. Marginless is your cell phone's ringing, the kids are fighting, the dog's barking, and the mac and cheese is burning all at the same time. Margin is your best friend stops by your house and says, let me take the kids for the day. Marginless is you've just been given a 30-page report at work that's due in 2 days. Margin is a coworker stops by your desk and says, I'll help you get it done. Marginless is you skip lunch because you're so busy and you can't get it all done. Margin is you slip out the back door and make a run to Dutch Bros for a caramelizer. Marginless is you've missed dinner for 3 nights in a row. Margin is you get home 45 minutes before dinner and throw the football with your sons or your daughters. Do you see the difference? Dr. Richard Swenson has written on the idea of margin in several books. His first book on the idea, The Overload Syndrome, he writes, margin is the space that once existed between our load and our limits. Margin is the space between vitality and exhaustion. It is our breathing room, our reserve, our leeway. Margin is the opposite of overload. And so let me share with you, maybe this is something you've realized is missing or needed in your life. Let me talk about some symptoms that we see in people who are overworked and worn out and burned out, if that's you. First of all, you'll often see that we try to multitask. Psychologists call it split attention. They say multitasking doesn't work at all. And we see Martha trying to do it. Listen to these words in Luke chapter 10, verse 40. Martha was distracted. I'll just stop there. Martha was distracted because she's trying to multitask. She's trying to listen and cook at the same time. They say multitasking doesn't work because actually neuroscientists have determined that our brain function slows down when we try to do two things at once. Maybe you've noticed if you try to talk to your son about mowing the lawn while he's playing Xbox, he can't hear a word you're saying at all. Just not a word. Maybe you've tried to hold a conversation with a coworker while he or she is answering email. They can't hear a thing. One of the symptoms is split attention. Another is referred to as being work addicted. You've heard the term workaholics. Here's what we read of Martha, verse 40. She says, I'm doing the work by myself, she's telling Jesus. Tell her to help me. Have you noticed this about work-addicted people? They tend to infect people around them. Have you noticed that some business owners and some managers and some bosses, they rob their own life of certain freedoms and then they expect others to skip on those things and they burn out. And that's the next thing that I have here. Another symptom is burnout. Verse 41, Jesus says this, Martha, Jesus answered, you are worried and upset about so many things. And maybe that's you this morning. Maybe you're worried and you're anxious and you're frazzled, and maybe it's because you're burned out and you've been trying to do too much. I think another symptom that you'll see in people who are struggling with trying to keep the ball rolling is to hurry. And if you've noticed this, speed has become so important in our culture. This Dr. Meyer Friedman, who coined the phrase hurry sickness, he says this, hurry sickness is trying to do more and more in less and less time. You can try to do more and less time, but eventually you'll hit the point of diminishing returns where more is less. I think we're addicted to hurrying because for some reason in our culture we value speed. We want everything fast. It used to be that getting a letter in the mail in a few days was good. Then we had overnight delivery. Now Amazon offers same-day delivery. And if you send someone an email or let alone a text, what's the expected span before that you expect them to answer in? 5 minutes? 1 minute? A text? 35 seconds? Something like that. Speed, for some reason we value speed, and so we're rushing and we're hurrying, and it's numbing the soul. I know that speed matters because to me sometimes it's a big deal. I was thinking about the time we bought our first house in Chandler. This was about 11, 12 years ago. And we moved in, and the day we moved in, I noticed right away there was no garage door opener. I was like, they forgot to install the garage door opener. So I walked down to the sales office and I said, hey, you built my house without a garage door opener. And they said, and the guy pulled the file out and he was kind enough to show it to me. He says, well, do you remember, Palmer, you passed on every option that we offered you. And I'm cheap, I know that. I said, I really passed on the garage door opener? He said, yeah, you said $350 was too much. You could get it at Lowe's for less. That's what he told me I said. Which you can, but then you have to install it yourself. So anyway, I went to Lowe's. He was right. And I bought it. I had a guy help me install it. And while he's installing it, he says, hey, Palmer, how do you want the speed adjusted? I said, who knew? You can adjust the speed on your garage door opener. Some of you need to go home and just turn that dial up. And I said, crank it all the way. I need it fast. nothing worse than sitting at a garage door waiting for it to open. So he put that thing in, and it would fly up. And the builder wasn't installing anything like this. And so I would bring the family home with pride, and I would pause and I'd say, watch, guys, it's the fastest garage door in the neighborhood, in the entire hood. And boom, I would sometimes speed at it just to show them, and they would yell, oh, we're going to hit it. No, it's going to open before we get there. And it was exciting for about 3, maybe 4 months. And then one day I hit the button and it folded like a taco. It just took the door up, bam. I was like, man, what happened? And so I called a repairman and he said, he's looking at these bent panels. I said, what went wrong? He said, it's just too fast, Palmer. You got to slow it down. You got to slow it down. And so he replaced the panels, and he said, the only way I can keep this from happening again and to keep you from buying a whole new door and a whole new opener is I have to slow it down to its slowest setting. And I said, no. And he did. And I would sit there in front of my driveway in shame as it slowest garage door in the neighborhood. Why does it matter? I don't know, but I thought it was so important. And we go through life like that. Here's what a Dr. Edward Hallowell writes. One of the reasons I put his book on the screen is because of the title. How do you like this? Crazy busy, overstretched, overbooked, and about to snap. He says, working at breakneck speed for extended periods of time does not enhance productivity. It reduces it. When we work too fast for too long, we get tired, become inefficient, we make mistakes, and become unable to think clearly and sharply. And so can I just say, start to eliminate hurry. Have you noticed that the most winsome people in the world, the most winsome people in your life are the ones who are not in a hurry? That when you talk to them, they act as though you're the most important person in the world. That they have nowhere else they'd rather be than to talk to you. And do you know what? Jesus, when he walked on earth, that's how it was with him. Jesus was never in a hurry. We never read that Jesus hurried or rushed anywhere. In fact, because he took his time, people died waiting for him. This actually happened. In Mark chapter 5, we read that a man named Jairus is taking Jesus. He says, my daughter is dying, and Jesus is on his way. And as he's on his way, a woman grabs onto him. And so he stops. And he says, what's wrong? And she says, I've been bleeding for 12 years. And so he heals her. And as he's having this conversation, while he's interrupted, when he stopped, one of Jairus' employees comes running up and he says, tell the teacher not to bother. Your daughter has died, implying because he wasted so much time, maybe. And Jesus, you know what he says? He says, it's all going to be okay. She's just asleep. I'll take care of this. He never hurried. And we read that he had this habit of not hurrying at all. Because when you hurry, you forget things. Have you noticed this? When you hurry, you forget your wallet. You forget it's garbage day. But then more importantly, when you hurry, you forget your friends. When you hurry, you forget your wife's birthday. When you hurry, you forget to hug your kids. When you hurry, you forget God. And so I want to talk about, with the rest of our time this morning, on how to establish some margins in life. And because we read, as we look at this passage in Luke chapter 10, we read of Mary. And Mary had great margins. I love how she preferred paying attention to Jesus more than anything else. Verse 39. Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. In that moment, she just sat there. Nothing else mattered more than listening to Jesus. When we read about Jesus' life and ministry and work, he always had these margins that he kept. We read, for example, in Mark chapter 1, very early, this is verse 35, in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place and prayed. Jesus had margins when he stopped to pray and let his soul rest and come close to God. But when he worked really hard. He worked hard. So I want you to understand this morning, to have margins does not mean I'm lazy or you're lazy. To have margins simply means that you've created space for your soul and for your relationship with God and for your body even to heal. We read this in Mark chapter 6, verse 31. So many people were coming and going that this is Jesus and his disciples, 6:31, they did not even have a chance to eat. And Jesus said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." Underline in your Bibles that last line, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." Rest is a margin word. Jesus would often find his margins in a garden early in the morning. He'd find margins on a mountaintop. His margins were in boats. His margins were taking a walk on the water. You can't do that, but you can take walks, just not on the water. But that's where he would go. So what can we do in our lives to establish and create clear margins that all of us need? The first thing I would say is to determine what matters most. Sometimes we put second things first. My encouragement here is to put first things first. We read in verse 42, Jesus says, Mary, this is a great line, by the way, Mary has chosen what is better. Mary, in other words, has determined what is most important. Mary had margins. She had predetermined that sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening to him teach was far more important than making hummus or whatever they were working on that day. But sometimes we allow second things, urgent things that seem urgent, to crowd out important things. I think one of the great challenges we have in life is to determine what is important and what is simply something urgent someone else has asked us to do. There's a Christian writer by the name of Charles Hummel, and he's written this in his short read on the tyranny of the urgent. He says, your greatest danger is allowing the urgent things to crowd out the most important things. And so my challenge here is to determine what is the most important things. I'll say next is to resolve to eradicate hurry. Sometimes we are hurrying and rushing for absolutely no reason at all. In verse 42, Jesus says to Martha, he says, few things, just a few things are needed. You know, don't stop all the hurrying and the rushing around and all the fretting, because just a few things are needed. I remember the day clearly when I stopped saying hurry up to my sons. I have 4 sons. And I remember the day when I told myself, from this day on, you'll stop saying hurry up. Because for some reason, as parents, we're always saying hurry up. It was in the summer, and we're up in the White Mountains, and we had about 4 or 5 days. So one day, I took them all golfing. And we start on the first hole, and right away, one of them sees a gopher hole or something. It says, hey, Dad, this might be a snake hole. And so forget about golf. We're looking at this hole. And I started to say, hurry up. But then it hit me, why am I saying hurry up, Palmer? We've got the next 18 hours till it gets dark to finish this round of golf. And so I promised at the start of that round, I wouldn't say hurry up all day. I'd never tried that before. And it was really hard, but for the rest of the day, we just took our time. It was like we're on vacation, actually. And there were guys behind us hitting up and kind of yelling at us, but we just kept taking our time looking at gopher holes and walking through the woods, looking for their balls. It was great. And if you're raising sons or daughters, maybe you could stop saying hurry up so much too. Because the day will come, and I only have one son at home now. I wish I hadn't rushed through so many things. That day will come for you too. And so maybe work hard, make a ruthless effort to eradicate hurry from your life. The famous Swiss psychologist Carl Jung once said, hurry is not of the devil. He said, hurry is the devil. And I said this earlier, Jesus never hurried. You know, in John chapter 10 and 11, we read that his good friend Lazarus is sick, and they sent word for him. He was sick when he heard he was just sick when Jesus first learned about it. It took him 4 days, we read, to get there. In the meantime, Lazarus died, and they buried him. And when he was approaching the town where Lazarus was buried, his friends met him 2 miles out, and they said, why didn't you hurry? That was the first thing he said. Why didn't you hurry? Why did you take your time? It took you 4 days. And you know what Jesus said? He's just asleep. He always said that. People die on it. It's going to be okay. But basically he said, it's going to be okay. And maybe you need to hear that this morning. Maybe work has you run ragged. Maybe things at home have you stressed out and worrying and anxious. And can I say this morning, the words Jesus would speak to you are, it's going to be okay. But resolve to eradicate hurry from your life is a discipline I would invite you to. And then I would say this next, focus on one thing, one person. Stop multitasking. Do you know what they found? That our brain function actually slows down when we try to do 2 things at once. And then the final thought that I've written down is to plan for margin. Let me ask you a margin question, because we plan for a lot of things in life. We schedule meetings. We have things that we plan on through our week and through our days. We plan out our days. But we rarely plan for margins. If you keep an iCalendar or any kind of planner, could I see your hand? Okay, you can put them down because you are actually not the ones that need them. It's everyone else, all of you who didn't raise your hand need that. Because a lot of things we plan in life, but very few people plan for margin. When I think of margins and business leaders, you know what I've seen? I've seen a pattern that the most creative and maybe even successful business leaders all have margins. One of my favorite is Richard Branson. He set a skydiving record, and then after that he started a record company. He floated around the world on a balloon, and then he started an airline. He kite surfed across the English Channel, and then he started a space program for business. I mean, he's the most creative guy, and he obviously has margins in his life, but he's also one of the most successful people. Margin is not laziness. When you stop to paint or when you stop to exercise or to work out, it's not laziness, it's margin, and our soul starts to heal. When you plan your day with time in the morning or time at night with God, it's not laziness, it's time that your body and your soul craves. There's a true story. There's a pastor in Minnesota where it's the land of lakes, and he realized that it was shorter for him if he ice skated across the lakes to church on Sundays than if he drove there. And so he started to ice skate to church on Sunday mornings. Well, the leaders in his church realized that no one did recreational things like ice skating and football on Sundays, and so they asked the pastor to sit down with him. And they said to him, and I don't want to mention the name of the denomination, that's not my point, but they said to him, good Lutherans don't ice skate on Sunday. It's God's day. And he said, well, what could be wrong with ice skating? They said, well, tell us this. They said, when you ice skate to church, is it a mode of transportation or are you actually enjoying it? Because if you're enjoying it, you need to stop. What's wrong with some people? He's created some margins in his life. Margins have a way of restoring the soul. Shauna Nyquist, who's Bill Hybels' daughter, is now a writer. Bill Hybels leads, maybe you've heard of it, one of the largest churches in the country, Willow Creek. And his daughter Shauna now writes, is a writer, and she writes about this moment when she was a junior higher. And she says one of her father's close friends died. And so the whole family, she and her brothers and sisters and her parents were at the funeral. And she said, as the funeral was ending, the last thing they did was show pictures of family vacations that this friend of Bill Hybels had taken his family on. And then his sons and daughters got up and talked about their memories of their father. And by the way, he died young, unfortunately, but every memory that they shared was of a family vacation. And she said, when the funeral was over, she said, Bill, her father pulled his kids together and his wife, and he wrapped his arms around them, and he couldn't stop crying. He's just weeping and weeping. And he said, first, I want to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I've been so busy and in such a hurry growing a church. I'm sorry, I've neglected you. He said, but I'm going to make you a promise today. He said, every time from now on, when there's a break at school, we're having a vacation. And she said their life memories began to expand. And every time there's a spring break, a fall break, a winter break, Christmas break, summer break, they did something, went somewhere. She said, we didn't have a lot of money, but we ended up going somewhere and getting away and changing the routine. And she said, it's given us a lifetime of memories. And so I want to say this morning, that I want to challenge you to fight for margin and to start to schedule it in your week and in your year and with your family. When, as we talk, as I end and as I talk about this idea of margin, I hope you've picked up several words this morning that I've used that are margin words. I think soul is a margin word. I think rest is a margin word. I think family is a margin word. I know family is a margin word because when I think about the time with my family, my favorite times are when we've created margin. I got to spend a week with my family last summer in Hawaii for my son's wedding. And the wedding, by the way, was scheduled. It was on the beach, scheduled for 1 o'clock. And so at 1 o'clock, we're all there. We're on time. He's marrying his wife is a daughter, or his bride-to-be is a daughter of a banker, and bankers are always precise and on time. And so 1 o'clock, though, we can't start because we have one singer coming, a local singer who's a Hawaiian, and he's supposed to sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And so we can't start without him. And he's 15 minutes late, then he's 30 minutes late. But now we're visiting with everyone who's there from out of town. It's over an hour. He's over an hour late. And people are stressed. Now, to me, it wasn't a big deal, but because I grew up in Africa, but to all the bankers and finance people there, they were really stressed out, not like we had to be anywhere else. And finally, our singer showed up, and he's in a Hawaiian shirt, has long, wavy hair, and he's just kind of strolling up in shorts and flip-flops, and he says, "Are we ready?" And I was like, I want to be Hawaiian. I want to live in Hawaii. And then he sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow, how life is meant to be. And it was perfect. And I was glad we didn't rush the day. I was glad we had a pre-reception before the wedding even started to hang out with friends and family. Family is a margin word. Sunday, Sabbath, is a margin word. You know, very early in the Bible story, the beginning of time, after God created the universe, he worked really hard for 6 days, and then we read this word, he had a Sabbath. He took a Sabbath's rest. A Sabbath means to stop. Most literally, it just means to stop, and everything stops. It also means rest. But Sabbath, Sunday, is a margin word. Now, I'm preaching to the choir here because today you're here. But some people stayed home today. Maybe there's a football game at 4:30 this afternoon, but some people, we're not going to name names or judge people on a Sunday. But on some days, you get busy. On some Sundays, instead of making it your Sabbath day, you get busy with chores at home, or the kids don't want to get out of bed, or you have a teenager saying they don't want to come. Make them come anyway. Or you have some kind of competition, some kind of tournament that your family needs to be at. I get that. But on some days, we act like we don't need a Sabbath's rest. We don't need Sunday. And I just want to remind you this morning that Sabbath, that Sunday, is a margin word. And so make it an important day. Make it a priority in your life. And so as you leave here today, I hope you can start to live a little bit differently. I hope that when it's time to work, you worked really hard. And then when it's time to rest your soul, you find a space in your life to do that.